Marcus Sterling had built his empire on the simple principle that everything had a price. At 38, he owned the largest cattle ranch in West Texas, controlled 3 banks, and had never encountered a problem that money couldn't solve. His dark eyes surveyed the modest farmhouse before him with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Elena Martinez stood in her doorway, clutching a faded shawl around her shoulders. At 32, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that came from enduring hardship with grace. Her husband's death 6 months ago had left her drowning in debts she never knew existed, and now the most powerful man in 3 counties had come to collect. "Mrs. Martinez," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I believe you know why I'm here." Elena's dark eyes met his without flinching. "The loan papers say I have 30 days. The papers say whatever I want them to say." Marcus stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow across her threshold. "Your husband borrowed against this property using forged documents. Technically, I could have you arrested for fraud." The wind picked up across the desert landscape, stirring dust devils in the distance. Elena's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "What do you want, Mr. Sterling?" Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want what's mine. This land, the house, everything, but I'm prepared to be generous." His gaze traveled over her with obvious intent. "You have something else of value." Elena's face paled, but she didn't step back. "I won't sell my dignity for your mercy." "Dignity doesn't pay debts, Mrs. Martinez. I suggest you reconsider your position carefully." As Marcus turned to leave, he called over his shoulder, "You have until sunset tomorrow to decide. Choose wisely." Chapter 2. The Ultimatum. The next evening arrived with the merciless heat that characterized Texas summers. Elena had spent the day in town, desperately seeking alternatives to Marcus Sterling's proposition. Every bank, every potential buyer, every possible source of help had been systematically blocked by Sterling's influence. The message was clear: submit or lose everything. Marcus arrived precisely at sunset, driving his black Mercedes across the dusty ranch road like a dark omen. He emerged from the vehicle wearing an expensive charcoal suit that seemed absurdly formal for the rural setting, yet somehow emphasized his power even more. Elena waited on her porch, wearing her best black dress, the same one she'd worn to her husband's funeral. She had made her decision, though it tasted like ashes in her mouth. "Have you considered my offer?" Marcus asked, climbing the wooden steps with deliberate slowness. "I've considered all my options," Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've made sure there aren't any." Marcus nodded with satisfaction. "Smart woman, I knew you'd see reason." "I'll sign over the property," Elena continued, "but I won't be your companion. I'd rather live on the streets." Marcus's expression darkened. "That's not how this works, Mrs. Martinez. I don't make partial deals." "Then we have nothing to discuss." The rancher studied her for a long moment, noting the way she held herself, despite her obvious fear. Most people crumbled under his pressure, but Elena Martinez stood like a reed in the wind, bent but not broken. "Very well," he said finally, "but understand this, when you're sleeping in your car next week, remember that you chose pride over practicality." As he turned to leave, Elena's voice stopped him cold. "Mr. Sterling, I may lose everything, but at least I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror." Chapter 3. The Unexpected Proposal. 3 days later, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on business. The image of Elena Martinez standing defiantly on her porch haunted him in ways he couldn't understand. He'd crushed dozens of people over the years, taken their properties, their businesses, their hopes. None of them had ever affected him like this. His assistant knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's been a development with the Martinez property." Marcus looked up from his desk, surrounded by the mahogany and leather that proclaimed his success. "What kind of development?" "She's filed for bankruptcy protection. The federal court has issued a temporary stay on all collection activities." For the first time in years, Marcus Sterling felt genuinely surprised. Elena had found a way to buy herself time, even if it meant destroying her credit forever. It was a move born of desperation, but also of remarkable strategic thinking. That evening, Marcus drove to Elena's property again. He found her in the garden behind the house, tending to vegetables by lamplight. She looked up as his headlights swept across the yard, but didn't stop working. "Bankruptcy," he said without preamble. "Clever." Elena continued pulling weeds. "It buys me 60 days. Maybe I'll find a miracle in that time." "There are no miracles in business, Mrs. Martinez, only temporary delays." She finally looked at him, dirt smudged on her cheek. "Why do you want this place so badly? You have thousands of acres already." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "This was my grandfather's land, originally. He lost it in the Depression. So this is about revenge. This is about completing what should never have been broken." Elena stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "And what about what shouldn't be broken now?" Their eyes met across the small garden, and for a moment, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. A crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. Chapter 4. Cracks in the armor. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed details about Elena's life that Marcus hadn't expected. Court documents showed her husband's gambling debts, his secret loans, the way he'd mortgaged their future without her knowledge. She'd been working 3 jobs to keep them afloat, unaware that David Martinez was systematically destroying everything they'd built. Marcus found himself studying these papers in his office late at night, trying to understand why he cared about the financial destruction of a woman he barely knew. Elena Martinez was supposed to be just another obstacle to overcome, another piece of property to acquire, but the numbers told a different story. She'd been paying down debts that weren't legally hers, sacrificing her own needs to honor her dead husband's obligations. There was an honor in that which Marcus hadn't encountered in his business dealings for years. His lawyer called with an update. "The bankruptcy judge is sympathetic to Mrs. Martinez. She's requesting a payment plan that would take 15 years to complete." 15 years, Marcus repeated. "And the property? She gets to keep it if she makes the payments." "Your claim becomes unsecured debt." Marcus stared out his office window at the vast expanse of his ranch. 15 years of monthly payments from a woman who could barely afford groceries. It was a Pyrrhic victory at best. That weekend, he drove past Elena's property and saw her hanging laundry on a line behind the house. The sight stopped him cold. When had he last seen someone performing such a simple domestic task? His own clothes were cleaned by a service, his meals prepared by a cook, his life managed by assistants. Elena noticed his truck and walked over to the fence that separated her property from the road. "Are you planning to sit there all day, or did you want something?" Marcus rolled down his window. "I wanted to discuss your payment plan." "What about it?" "It's unrealistic. You'll never be able to maintain those payments." Elena's jaw tightened. "That's my problem, not yours." Chapter 5. Unexpected kindness. A week later, a severe thunderstorm swept across the desert, bringing hail and flash flooding. Marcus watched from his ranch house as the weather devastated the area, knowing that smaller properties would suffer the most damage. Against his better judgment, he drove to Elena's farm the next morning. What he found there made him stop his truck in the middle of the road. Elena was on her roof, trying to nail a tarp over a gaping hole left by hail damage. She was soaked to the skin and clearly struggling with the heavy material. "Get down from there before you kill yourself," Marcus called out. Elena looked down at him, surprised. "I can handle it. You're going to fall and break your neck. I'm coming up." Before she could protest, Marcus was climbing the ladder she'd propped against the house. His expensive boots weren't designed for roof work, but he managed to reach her side. "Hold that corner," he instructed, taking charge of the situation with natural authority. Working together, they managed to secure the tarp over the damaged section. When they climbed down, both were muddy and exhausted. "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "I couldn't have managed that alone." Marcus found himself studying her face, noting the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself despite her obvious fatigue. "When did you last eat a real meal?" The question seemed to surprise her. I eat. That's not what I asked. Elena looked away. Food isn't the priority right now. Without thinking, Marcus reached for his wallet. Take this. Buy groceries. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's payment for showing me how to properly secure a tarp. Despite herself, Elena almost smiled. You're a terrible liar, Mr. Sterling. I'm learning that about myself. As Marcus drove away, he realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in years, he'd acted without calculating the benefit to himself. Chapter 6. The Softening. Marcus began finding excuses to drive past Elena's property. He told himself it was business, monitoring his investment, ensuring the property was maintained. But the truth was more complicated. He found himself genuinely concerned about her welfare. When he noticed her old truck hadn't moved for 3 days, he stopped to investigate. Elena answered the door, looking pale and weak. "Are you sick?" he asked. "Just tired," she replied, but her voice was hoarse. Marcus pushed past her into the house, noting the sparse furnishings, the empty refrigerator, the medicine bottles on the kitchen counter. "You have pneumonia." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You need to see a doctor." "I can't afford a doctor." The simple statement hit Marcus harder than he expected. Here was a woman literally making herself sick, trying to honor debts that weren't rightfully hers, while he lived in luxury built on the misfortune of others. "I'm taking you to the hospital," he announced. "No." It wasn't a request. Elena tried to protest, but she was too weak to resist when Marcus gently but firmly guided her to his truck. During the drive to town, she fell asleep against the passenger window, and Marcus found himself stealing glances at her peaceful face. At the hospital, he stayed while she was examined, paid for her treatment without being asked, and drove her home with a bag of prescribed medications. "Why are you doing this?" Elena asked as he helped her to her door. Marcus paused, realizing he didn't have a good answer. "I don't know." "That's the first honest thing you've said to me." That night, Marcus lay awake in his king-sized bed, thinking about Elena sleeping alone in her small house, recovering from an illness brought on by stress and malnutrition. For the first time in his adult life, his wealth felt like a burden rather than an achievement. Chapter 7. Revelation. Elena's recovery took 2 weeks, during which Marcus found himself checking on her daily. He brought groceries, claiming his cook had overordered. He arranged for a handyman to fix her roof, saying it was protecting his investment. Each excuse felt more transparent than the last. One evening, he arrived to find Elena sitting on her porch, looking stronger but thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about this being your grandfather's land." Marcus settled into the chair beside her, something he'd never done before. "What about it? Tell me about him." The request surprised Marcus. No one had asked about his family history in years. His name was Samuel Sterling. He built the original ranch house with his own hands, raised cattle through the Depression until the bank foreclosed. What happened to him? He died broken, lost everything, including his pride. Marcus's voice carried old pain. "I swore I'd never let that happen to our family again." Elena was quiet for a moment. "So you became the bank instead?" The observation stung because it was accurate. "I became successful. There's a difference between success and revenge, Mr. Sterling." "Is there?" Elena turned to look at him directly. "Your grandfather lost his land because of circumstances beyond his control. You're taking mine because you can. Which one of you is really the stronger man?" The question hung in the desert air between them. Marcus had never considered that his pursuit of power might actually be a form of weakness, a reaction to childhood fears rather than adult strength. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted. "Maybe it's time you did." That night, Marcus walked through his empty ranch house, seeing it clearly for the first time, all his success, all his power, and he was utterly alone. Elena Martinez, who had nothing, seemed richer than he'd ever been. Chapter 8. The Turning Point. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Marcus's lawyer called with an update on Elena's bankruptcy case. "There's been a development. We found evidence that David Martinez forged his wife's signature on the loan documents. She's not legally responsible For the debt. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What does that mean? It means you have no claim against her property. The loan was fraudulent from the beginning. Marcus hung up the phone and stared out his office window. He could walk away now, let Elena keep her property, and no one would question his decision. It would be the legally correct thing to do. But it would also mean losing any excuse to see her again. That realization shocked him. When had Elena Martinez become more important than the land he'd spent years trying to acquire? He drove to her property that afternoon, finding her in the garden again. She looked up as he approached, and he could see wariness in her eyes. "I have news about your case," he said. Elena straightened, bracing herself. "What kind of news?" "The loan documents were forged. You're not responsible for your husband's debts." For a moment, Elena just stared at him. Then she sank down onto a garden bench, overwhelmed. "I'm free." "You're free." Tears began streaming down her face, tears of relief, of exhaustion, of emotions too complex to name. Marcus found himself kneeling beside her, offering his handkerchief. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "You could have kept quiet, continued the pressure." Marcus looked into her eyes and saw his answer reflected there. "Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the land." "What's it about now?" "You," he said simply. "It's about you." Elena studied his face, seeing something there she'd never noticed before. Vulnerability beneath the power, loneliness beneath the success. "Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time, "what do you really want?" Chapter 9. Confession. Marcus stood slowly, suddenly feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. Elena's question hung between them like a challenge, demanding honesty he wasn't sure he could provide. "I want," he began, then stopped. "I've spent so many years taking what I wanted that I'm not sure I remember how to want something I can't simply acquire." Elena remained seated on the garden bench, looking up at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed defenses. "Try," she said softly. Marcus walked to the fence line, staring out at the desert landscape that had shaped both their lives. "I want to wake up in the morning and have someone care whether I'm alive or dead. I want to come home to a house that feels like more than just an expensive shell. I want to matter to someone for who I am, not what I own." He turned back to face her. "I want you to look at me the way you looked at your husband in that photograph on your mantel." Elena's breath caught. "Marcus, I know it's impossible. I know I've done nothing but cause you pain. I know you have every reason to hate me." His voice grew quieter. "But I also know that these past few weeks, getting to know you, have been the most real I've felt in years." Elena stood and walked toward him, stopping just close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. Marcus nodded, afraid of the answer. "I see a man who's forgotten how to be human. I see someone who's built walls so high he can't remember what he was trying to protect." She paused. "But I also see someone who brought me medicine when I was sick, who fixed my roof in the rain, who could have destroyed me but chose not to." "Elena, I see someone worth saving, Marcus. The question is whether you think you're worth saving too." Chapter 10. The Choice. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his study, Elena's words echoing in his mind. On his desk lay 2 documents, the original loan papers that could still cause Elena legal trouble if he chose to pursue them, and a deed transfer that would give her clear title to her property forever. His phone rang. It was his business manager. "Marcus, I've been reviewing the Martinez case. Even with the forgery evidence, we could still make a civil claim. Fraud damages, court costs. We could probably get the property for half its value." Marcus stared at the papers before him. "And if we don't pursue it, then you've spent 2 years and considerable legal fees for nothing. Your board won't understand." "My board doesn't need to understand." After hanging up, Marcus picked up a pen. With deliberate strokes, he signed the deed transfer, officially relinquishing any claim to Elena's property. Then he tore up the loan documents and threw them in the fireplace. The next morning, he drove to Elena's house one final time. She was hanging laundry again, and the sight made him smile despite his nervousness. "I have something for you," he said, holding out the deed. Elena read it carefully, her eyes widening. "You're giving me clear title? It was always yours. I'm just making it official." "Why?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Because I'm trying to become the man you think I could be." Elena set the deed aside and stepped closer to him. "And what kind of man is that?" "The kind who deserves a woman like you." For a long moment they stood facing each other in the morning sunlight. Then Elena reached up and touched his face gently. "Marcus Sterling," she said, "I think you're finally learning the difference between taking what you want and earning what you need. Will you help me learn?" Elena smiled, the first genuine smile he'd ever seen from her. "I think I'd like that." As Marcus pulled her into his arms, he realized that for the first time in his life, he'd found something worth more than all his wealth combined. Chapter 11. New Beginnings. 6 months later, the desert landscape around Elena's property had transformed. What had once been a struggling farm was now a thriving garden, thanks to Marcus's investment in proper irrigation and Elena's knowledge of the land. But the changes went deeper than agriculture. Marcus had moved out of his sterile ranch house and into a modest home he'd built on the edge of Elena's property, close enough to be together, separate enough to respect her independence. The transformation in Marcus himself was even more dramatic. The man who had once ruled through intimidation now spent his mornings working alongside Elena in the garden, his expensive suits replaced by work clothes, his cold authority softened by genuine warmth. "The board is concerned about your recent decisions," his assistant reported during one of Marcus's rare visits to his corporate office. "What kind of concerns?" "The charitable foundation, the employee profit-sharing program, the decision to forgive several outstanding loans. They're questioning your judgment." Marcus looked out his office window toward the desert where Elena was waiting for him. "Tell the board I've never seen more clearly in my life." That evening, as they sat on Elena's porch watching the sunset, she leaned against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up the ruthless businessman persona?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I regret the years I wasted being someone I didn't recognize, but regret this." He gestured toward their peaceful surroundings, toward the life they'd built together. "Never. Even though you're not the most powerful man in 3 counties anymore." Marcus smiled. "I'm the luckiest man in 3 counties. That's better." Elena turned to look at him. "I love you, Marcus Sterling." "I love you too, Elena Martinez. More than I ever thought possible." As the stars appeared in the desert sky, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He'd started as a man who believed everything could be conquered and discovered that the most precious things could only be earned through surrender. Chapter 12. Full Circle. 1 year after their first confrontation, Marcus and Elena stood in the same spot where he had once demanded her submission. But now they stood as equals, as partners, as 2 people who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. The occasion was their wedding, a simple ceremony attended by the people whose lives they'd touched together. There was Maria, the single mother whose farm Marcus had saved from foreclosure. There was Dr. Rodriguez, whose clinic Elena had helped establish with Marcus's funding. There were dozens of others who had benefited from the couple's growing commitment to using wealth as a tool for healing rather than conquest. As the minister spoke about love and commitment, Marcus thought about his grandfather Samuel, who had lost everything to forces beyond his control. Marcus had spent his life ensuring he would never be that vulnerable, never be that powerless. But standing here with Elena, he realized that true strength came not from controlling others, but from having the courage to be vulnerable with the right person. "Do you, Marcus, take Elena to be your wife?" "I do," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the desert wind. "Do you, Elena, take Marcus to be your husband?" Elena looked into his eyes and saw not the ruthless rancher who had once threatened her, but the man who had learned to kneel before love itself. "I do," she replied. As they kissed beneath the vast Texas sky, Marcus remembered Elena's words from that first confrontation. I may lose everything, but at least I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror. Now, as he held his wife in his arms, Marcus realized he could finally say the same thing about himself. He had lost his reputation as a ruthless businessman, lost his image as an untouchable power broker, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable. A soul he could live with, a heart he could trust, and a love that had transformed them both. The desert wind carried their laughter across the landscape, and somewhere in that sound was the echo of redemption, the promise of new beginnings, and the quiet triumph of two people who had learned that the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from surrender to something greater than themselves. In the end, Marcus Sterling had knelt before Elena Martinez, not in defeat, but in recognition of the only power that truly mattered, the power of love to transform even the hardest heart.